Hi everyone, my name is Ariella and today I'm going to be telling you all my testimony. Now this is something that I have not told before, so I wrote it out, and if you see me like glancing down, it's because there's something that I kind of that's important, and just so I stay on track and don't go off track. So I'm just going to start off with this video by saying that I was born and raised in a Christian household, and I went to church until I was around the age of 9 or 10, and then around that time my family stopped going, and so this for me was really when my faith started to dwindle because I wasn't attending church on a regular basis. And also when I was younger, my mom, we had regular times when we would go to church groups, and my mom when I was younger was really active in the church, so I spent a lot of my younger years in the church, but a lot of my older years from around the ages of 10 to 20 I didn't go to church, so for about 10 years. And it was in the beginning was when my faith started to dwindle. So like I said, once I got into middle school, kind of had some faith, wasn't really there, and then once I went to high school it was completely gone. So I first started, I think, to get into New Age beliefs. Now this is not when I was yeah, I'm a total New Ager, but this is what opened my heart and opened my mind up to it was when I was in middle school, and in high school I was really big into the idea of ancient aliens. And I mean, most of my family can sort of attest that I was really big into aliens and all of that type of thing. And when I was in middle school, I really got into the idea of how aliens came to Earth and sort of breeded with humans and made us into the humans we are today. I was really big on to the idea of the aliens coming and making the pyramids and just helping older civilizations just advance and grow. And this was really what I was just into when I was younger. I loved watching Ancient Aliens. If you have ever seen Ancient Aliens, that basically was what I believed. I believed everything that happened in Ancient Aliens. That was basically my thought process and my beliefs. And this sort of carried on until I became Christian. So I believed in Ancient Aliens from middle school basically up until my second year of college. I was really big into all of that. And so this was also around the time, that I was really big into the idea, and this is where I started to become deceived in the idea that all religions are the same or have some sort of similar background. So yeah, basically a thought taught in Ancient Aliens, and this is where I started to become deceived, middle school up until college. So now this is when I'm going to be talking about something that a lot of people get uncomfortable about. I brought it up to my sister about how I wanted to talk to about it in my testimony video. She was like, Ariella, you better not talk about it, blah, 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 blah. But for me, this is what really brought me into the New Age. Now some people are very have a mindset on Jesus and they can be vegan, no problem. But for me, I wasn't Christian, so I slowly found veganism when I moved to California. I lived in Northern California. And when let me start over. So something that I believe is not always talked about in the veganism movement is sort of the spirituality or the religion that comes along with it. And this to me is the New Age movement. It's really big into all that. And I think when I became vegan was when I was sucked into and brainwashed into the New Age movement and New Age beliefs and New Age lifestyles. If most people saw me back when I was living in California, I was a completely different person with just the way that I thought and the way that I acted, and just everything going on in my head was completely different than now. And so basically, when I found New Age, when I found veganism, I wasn't in the New Age, but over time, it slowly started to creep its way into my life. So, for example, it started out with yoga. I was practicing yoga every day for around two hours a day, practicing yoga. And then when I started practicing yoga, then I was like, let's practice meditation. And I started practicing meditation, and what I soon started to realize was that I was really good at meditating. I could meditate and in 10 minutes be in a meditative state, be super relaxed, and I would meditate for a couple hours. And Then after meditation, I started learning about raising your consciousness and raising your chakras and how to activate different chakras. I started practicing that, and it just slowly started to go like that. And then after that, I started getting into astral projection using binaural beats, and it was a slow, like a ball rolling down a hill, building up stuff. It was a slow process until it just got really big, and that became what I was practicing. And it all started because, or a big reason it started was because I became vegan, and because I started to surround myself with vegans that thought this way. And so the more that I started doing this was the more that I started to believe in the idea of aliens. And this was also around the time that I started to use a lot of drugs. This is when I started to smoke a lot of medical marijuana. I got my medical marijuana card, so I wasn't smoking illegally, but I was smoking a lot of weed to help with chakras and meditation. But I also, around the time, was doing a lot of, not doing a lot, but I was doing shrooms and doing things like that to also elevate my chakras, talk to different demons or whatever. At the time I didn't think they were demons, but looking back, that's what they were. And then now, sort of what I'm thinking, I think the main reason why I was doing this was, for one, like, I was being incredibly deceived, but I also was in a lot of pain. I was suffering a lot of pain from things that happened in my childhood and things that I experienced that I just didn't have, like, I don't want to say I didn't have someone to talk to them about, or talk about my feelings, but I've always been someone that, like, my mom says I'm super emotional, and I am very emotional, but I also hide a lot of my emotions. And so during this time, I had a lot of pain and a lot of things I was going through that I didn't have someone to talk to them about, so I put a lot of them down. And that's going to be for another video that I'll talk about those, but for right now, we're not going to talk about that. And so yeah, so I realized now that the new age started to, like I said, change me as a person, change the way I thought, the way I acted, but it also changed how I said the way I thought. Most of my thoughts, I feel like, were wicked like how it says in the Bible. And yeah, like I said, I was being incredibly deceived. Throughout this whole time, I wanted to find truth, and that's why I was so big into this, because the new age movement is so deceiving, where they tell you it's all about finding truth. And so I was constantly looking for answers and looking for things that I can never be completely fulfilled in. And anytime someone brought up Jesus, I didn't want to even look into that, because I was like, who cares about that? But knowing deep down that he really was the answer, I just didn't want to feel convicted for the sins and the way that I was living my life, so I chose to shun him off. And so then basically throughout this whole time, by the way, too, my mom was preaching to me about Jesus. She's always preached to me about Jesus, but like I said, I was just so spiritually disconnected from God and disconnected from Jesus that whenever someone brought him up, I would just ignore it, and I didn't want anything to do with it. So one day I was practicing meditation that day, and I called my mom because I was doing astral projection afterwards, and I told her about it, and she got really mad at me, and she told me not to do that, not to leave your vessel open, because you never know what might enter your body. And during this time, during this time that I really started to practice meditation and astral projection, and just sort of meditating my body to basically me, I would meditate and I would get to a point most of the time where my body would just start to shake, and I felt I would feel myself leave out of my body, I'd pop and be out of my body, and it's not something you should be doing, but this is what I was doing. And so I told my mom about it, and she was like, don't do this, yelling at me. And during this time, she would, talk to me about Jesus, and I would always get incredibly offended and very mad, so mad. The way that I used to act towards people when they would bring up Jesus was really bad. And now looking back on it, I really do think that I was being demonically or attacked spiritually by evil spirits. And during the time, of course I wouldn't have thought so, because I was being so incredibly deceived, thinking that I was being visited by angels of light, or by things that were bringing me towards, you know, God, or bringing me towards heavenly like thoughts. But looking back on it now, I realized that I was not, and that I was for sure being demonically attacked, because, excuse me, once I became Christian, for 6 months probably, I was being spiritually attacked all the time with my thoughts and with the things I was doing. I was not in a good place, and I mean, I still wasn't in a good place now, but at least it was being masked, and I wasn't like aware of it, you know. And then, so yeah, so basically she told me that, and something with that conversation that day stuck with me, and I wasn't like completely like all gung-ho Jesus, but I was still, you know, kind of like, you know, questioning it a little bit more. And so then what happened was I started to do a lot of research into just like Satanism, not become a Satanist, but just like how a lot, I mean, on YouTube you can do, there's tons of videos on it, but how like there's a lot of big Satanists and New Age believers who who control like our media and control our music industry and all of that type of thing. And something that, you know, I wasn't aware of, that I became aware of, was how Satan was in the kingdom of heaven. He was in control of the music, and he made all the music, so it would make sense for him on earth to sort of mask himself in the music that we listen to. And so I started looking into a lot of that and watching a lot of videos on decoding different satanistic things that they're talking about, and different things like that. So I got really big into that, basically. And that was when I started to sort of turn on the New Age, but I also was still in the New Age. Like I didn't want to get rid of it, but I knew that I kind of had to, so I continued to do research into Christianity online, and I watched a lot of online sermons and videos, mostly of kids my age and of people who were a little bit older than me who dabbled in the New Age, who became Christian, because I figured if I'm going to become Christian, I should at least watch people that sort of did the same thing as me at one point and now are Christians. So I continue to watch them, and I watch people like the Vigilant Christian, who's a little crazy at times, but his videos, I feel like, do a good like they do explain things very well. And I started to watch Philia Family, and she was someone who helped me a lot. And I watched a lot of other just like channels on YouTube. And so yeah, where am I? So I'm living in California still. I'm watching these Christian videos, and then one day I'm just kind of thinking like, I don't want to live here anymore, because for one, I was really spiritually depraved and I didn't know what was going on. You know, I was just kind of came out of this whole thing and I didn't really feel comfortable. I was partying all the time, drinking, doing drugs all the time. So I sort of needed to leave the situation, because I didn't have any, I had good friends, but I didn't have any friends who were doing the same on the same spiritual walk as me, and there wasn't really any churches in my area that I knew of, or really that I had interest in finding. So I decided to move home. A big reason that I moved home, of course, was for school, but I also wanted to move home just because I needed to get out of the toxic environment that I was in. So I moved back to Hawaii, and I lived in Hawaii for like 3 months before I started school. And when I started school, I moved to Hilo, and that was when I decided that I needed to find a church. And one day I was on Instagram, and there was this guy that I used to go to church with when I was younger, and like we grew up together in our younger years when I did attend church, and I knew that he was really big into the faith. And so I started to message him on Instagram asking him about a church, and he told me about the school church at my university, and about another church that sort of worked with my school church. And so the first week that I moved to school, I went to church with him, and that was when I really started to feel convicted, and that was when I knew that Jesus was my savior, and that Jesus is the Almighty. And that was when I really wanted to give my life over to Christ. So yeah, so I started going to church all the time, and I was still struggling with things, still struggling spiritually with things, because, you know, I struggled for a little over 6 months with just the New Age and leaving that. But it was really awesome to be able to find a church that I felt very comfortable in. And so it was funny, because just before I started going to this church, I was praying and praying and praying, and just sort of like building my relationship with God. And he told me that I needed to get baptized, but it was something that I was kind of always scared of, because I was like, baptism is kind of like, you know, I just felt kind of sketchy about it. And that was when I was, you know, just felt uncomfortable about it. And then one day I was going to church with my friend, and they brought up that they were doing baptisms, and that was when, or like 2 weeks from that time, and I just signed up and got baptized, and that was the most like relieving time. And ever since then, my relationship with God has gotten a lot better. And that was when I really started to notice a change in my life, mentally change, because I had a lot of mental baggage, you know, not even from me being in the new age, but just like deep down baggage that I had from when I was younger up, you know, just a lot of things that I didn't want to forgive myself for. And so yeah, so I found God, and you know, yeah, so that's basically my testimony. Every day is getting better and better. There's been times, of course, like in between this last year and a half, that I've had some dry times and some slip-ups, and I pray about it, and I know that God forgives me. But yeah, so that's my testimony. Okay, bye.